Okay, well, it's 12:05 and time to begin once again the UCCS speaker series. Thank you all for joining us. It's a pleasure today to introduce uh, again, because Professor Ramakrishnan has been with the center several times before and is a familiar face in the Capitol community, but it's nonetheless a pleasure to introduce him as Professor of Public Policy and Political Science at the University of California, Riverside, and founding director of the Center for Social Innovation, which aims to integrate researchers, community organizations, and civic stakeholders in collaborative projects and long-term partnerships that boost collective impact, resulting in enhanced civic leadership and policy innovation. Professor Ramakrishnan holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from Brown University and a PhD in politics from Princeton. He's a board member of the California Endowment, chair of the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, and relevant to today's presentation, director of the Inland Empire Census Complete Count Committee. He's published many articles and 6 books, including most recently, Framing Immigrants, and also The New Immigration Federalism. He was recently named to the Frederick Douglass 200, where he joins, among others, Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey. And he's currently finishing a book entitled Citizenship Reconfigured, which will come out in 2020 under the Cambridge University Press label. So without further ado, it's again a great pleasure to introduce Karthik Ramakrishnan, who will speak on After Census What? A Foundation for Regional Planning. So Karthik, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich, and thank you to the center. As always, feel very welcome here and really look forward to the conversation that we will have in the Q&A. What I'll be presenting today is a set of activities and insights that we're still gaining as we do the work in our region and as we think about pivoting to what's next. What I'll talk about today, I'll show the key takeaways in a second. Actually, let me go to that right now. So the key takeaways for this talk are that census has been a game changer in many California regions. I'm going to be focusing primarily on the Inland Empire region of Riverside and San Bernardino counties. But given the connections that we have with other regions in Inland California as well as coastal California, we know that Census 2020 has meant a lot, not the least because of the kinds of investments by state government and by philanthropy when it comes to census outreach work. What it's meant in our region has meant significant boost in nonprofit capacity building, both for individual nonprofits as well as their ability to work in a networked fashion with each other and with government agencies and with researchers. Census has also been critical for what we call the civic engagement continuum, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Within the Inland Empire, it's laid a solid foundation for inclusive regional planning, which is where a lot of the census partners are hoping to pivot next. But there's been this little thing of COVID crisis and response. So to some extent, that is, I wouldn't say it's blown people off course, but it's certainly forced organizations, both on census as well as what comes after a census, to adapt, both logistically, but also thinking strategically. So I'll end with a discussion of what's next. What we're hoping to learn in terms of other regions, in terms of the legacy effects of census outreach, if you will, and what some of the implications might be for governments, nonprofits, and philanthropy, thinking ahead to inclusive regional planning. Rich has already talked about our center. So the goals of our center is to promote collaborative research, policy innovation, and narrative change. A lot of my thinking about narrative change is informed by my own scholarship. One of the recent books that was mentioned was Framing Immigrants, where I really got much more expert on framing, messaging, narrative than ever before. And maybe unlike many other academics, I'm actually trying to incorporate that into the work that we actually do in the center. We're about a little over 2 years old now. And we really see the work that we do in partnership with community, with government, and with philanthropy. So our key partners, as you'll see in what I discussed today, are community organizations. A lot of them are in the Inland Empire, but I've been doing work that's been applied research for a lot longer than 2.5 years. So I've been running the National Asian American Survey since 2008, and also a project that we started called AAPI Data. It's a national resource. It's a publisher of demographic data and policy research on Asian American and Pacific Islander populations. So even though most of our community partners are concentrated in the Inland Empire region, we also have partnerships throughout the state and nationally. In fact, one quick plug I'll make is that we're continuing our work with the API community. We're starting a giving campaign for the entire month of May. May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so we are working with philanthropic partners like the Asian Pacific Fund, who is our core partner in this, as well as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, the Asian Pacific, that's a national organization, Asian Pacific Community Foundation, which is an LA-based community foundation, as well as the Korean American Community Foundation of New York. We were planning on running this campaign several months ago. It's taken on new light in terms of COVID, both with the kinds of challenges, the economic challenges our communities face, particularly Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander populations, but other Asian Americans as well. But also the massive increase in hate crimes that we've seen in our communities. So this is our way of making sure that the nonprofits that are serving our communities get the kind of support that they need, and to really grow a culture of philanthropy and a pattern of philanthropy among smaller donors in API communities. So watch out for that. You can go to giveandmay.org. Right now, we are not yet live. We have 75 organizations that have signed up. We'll probably get a few more. Vast majority of them are in California. So you'll probably see a lot of nonprofits that you're familiar with, and even those that you're not familiar with. I was surprised by many of these organizations that have not been on my radar that are doing some incredible work. So community organizations, I mean, that's, I would say probably, or the reason why we have that is first is they are our core partners regionally as well as nationally. We also consider government agencies and public officials locally and statewide to be key partners. Nationally, we were doing more work a few years ago. It's been a bit of a challenge with the current administration, particularly with respect to the kinds of research that we do informing policy. But we still find plenty of interest in our work in government agencies at the federal level, as well as in Congress. We also consider philanthropy to be a key partner. Our center, for better or worse, I think it's overall good. We are entirely funded by philanthropy. And we are fortunate in that, in how we got started. And some of these are, you know, some pretty big names in philanthropy, including in California, like the James Irvine Foundation, the California Wellness Foundation, Weingart Foundation, but also nationally now we've been fortunate to get support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Robert Wood Johnson. So we see philanthropy not just as funders, but you know, a lot of times there's this term thrown about as thought partners. It might sound a bit hokey for some, but it is very helpful for us to get input, but also just, to see program officers and foundation CEOs as strategic partners in the work, and not simply as funders who are funding something that we've already decided to do. And then finally, we have a host of on-campus partners and assets, including, for example, CSERT, which is the Center for Energy Research and Technology. We have a Strategic Growth Council. We're a sub-award on a Strategic Growth Council grant with them. So they are a major campus asset and a strategic partner in the work. But we work across campus. We work with student programs, with some of the projects that we have, and I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A. We were supposed to participate in a conference to be held at UC Santa Cruz on how university research centers like ours can do more collaborative work with community and really unlock the kinds of assets that we have in our university campuses to better collaborate and add value to our regions. Unfortunately, that got canceled because of COVID, but our center is very eager to work across the UC system and outside the UC system to figure out how we can unlock the full potential of our public universities, our land-grant institutions. Whenever I talk about the center, I have to put up this map in terms of motivating, in terms of why we call ourselves the Center for Social Innovation. And some of you may have seen this before. Put most simply, when you ask most people, where is innovation happening in California, and you ask them to drop pins on a map, most likely they will drop pins in all over coastal California, from the Bay Area with terms of infotech and high tech and biotech, down to Los Angeles with entertainment tech, and then down to Orange County and San Diego in terms of biotech and other aspects of technology. By contrast, when most people think of inland California, when they think of the Inland Empire and Central Valley, innovation is not the first thing that comes to mind. You're more likely to hear adjectives like challenges, problems, poverty. Now, this is not to say that coastal California doesn't have these issues. They certainly have these issues and more, but that's not the dominant narrative. What we are hopeful to do with our center, not just with our name, but in the work that we do, is to reframe in people's minds what they think about when they think about the Inland Empire and Central Valleys. So they think about change agents within these regions, in government, in universities, in the nonprofit sector. And so that's, put simply, that's what we try to do. And I think we've succeeded to some degree. First of all, even getting state officials and philanthropy to talk about inland California as if it's a thing. In the past year, it's happened. We're very grateful for that. And we will continue pushing the work, not only in the Inland Empire, but more generally for inland California, including our partners in the Central Valley. Say a bit about census outreach in the Inland Empire in terms of how we're trying to innovate and organize to get out the count. So you see the CSI logo there. We're doing this in partnership with both the County of Riverside and San Bernardino, as well as with the Inland Empire Community Foundation. If you look at the hard to count maps that the state complete count effort has, the Inland Empire ranks pretty high in terms of census tracts that are hard to count. Similar kind of story that you'll see in the Central Valley as well. If you look at the undercount risk, this is overstating it to some degree, actually to a significant degree. About 1.13 million out of 4.6 million live in census tracts that have high hard to count scores. And we see more of that in San Bernardino County than in Riverside County, but this is a pretty significant problem. And if you think about the rough rule of thumb that the US Census Bureau uses is that every person that is not counted represents somewhere in the range of $2,000 a year in terms of public funding. You project that out over 10 years, that's $20,000. And it quickly adds up in terms of the potential financial hit to localities for an undercount. There's also been a lot of talk in California potentially losing a House seat this year because we have not been growing as fast as some of the other states in the Southwest and in the Southeast, but also potentially because of the undercount. So how are we organizing and innovating in order to achieve this? So our center got involved. I don't know too many other UC centers that are involved in census outreach beyond what's going on in their campuses. We are the lead even for an effort that we call UCR Counts within UCR, but we're doing most of our work outside of UCR. And what we identified with our government and community partners is that we needed to get organized first in terms of sharing information across sectors, that we could not do this only as a government-led effort or only as a nonprofit-led effort or as parallel efforts that are not in communication with each other. It was also important to build not just a spirit of collaboration, but norms and frameworks for collaboration, which we did in late summer and early fall of 2018. It was also important for us to make sure that resources are allocated efficiently so that we're not leaving any major gaps and that we're avoiding duplication, but also equitably. As I'll show later on, there are a lot of disparities even within the Inland Empire. And it was important for the coalition early on to make sure that we were being equitable in terms of how those funds would be allocated. And then finally, to create legacy effects that strengthen the region. We knew that we had millions of dollars coming in. So overall, it's been about $7 million, public and private, that have come into the region. And while most of that effort has been devoted to try to minimize the undercount as much as we can, we knew that going into it that we have all these resources, that was a truly kind of special moment for our region, that we should be thinking intentionally about how do we create legacy effects that can strengthen our nonprofit infrastructure and the kind of network relationships and collaborations that we have with government agencies and with the academic community. There's a lot that's been good, but it started with a lot of anxiety. So in summer 2018, and by the way, I think a lot of this you'll find in other regions. I think to a significant degree, the Inland Empire has developed a strong reputation in this state because we've had a university partner that's been more centrally engaged with this effort than in some of the other regions. And also because the Inland Empire started off at a much lower baseline than other regions did in terms of their census preparedness and in terms of the strength of their nonprofit sector. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but just to say that there was a lot of anxiety, especially people are looking over their shoulders, looking over at LA, that had already built their complete count committee well before summer 2018. It's a city and county effort in Los Angeles. And so what we did is we helped organize state census regional meetings in coordination with the state, but we also built a strong relationship with our county government partners, as well as with the nonprofit table that was largely civic engagement organizations that were interested in census. We submitted a very strong RFI, request for information, to the state in terms of our thinking and strategy on census outreach. And in many ways that ends up being the roadmap for what we did. We did this having a vague sense of how money might flow down to our region, but really not much level of detail. But we were prepared for that when those RFPs got put out in the fall of 2018 for the counties as well as for the administrative community-based organization. We organized design sessions. Instead of just saying, let's take the LA model and just plop it down here, we created design sessions with our county and council of government partners. So we had city governments engaged in that as well. And we proposed a structure that everyone felt really good about. Another key decision that we helped facilitate was, instead of having Riverside County do its own thing, San Bernardino County do its own thing. I mean, these counties are about 2.5 million residents. These are not small counties. What we were able to do over time in building these relationships and with some gentle persuasion, actually didn't need to take too much persuasion, but we organized in a way that we had one Inland Empire effort coordinated with all of the government agencies across both counties, as well as with the nonprofit sector. So we built this committee, and I'm the unpaid director of the Inland Empire Complete Count Committee. It's yet another title, yet another set of responsibilities that I have. But thankfully, we have enough staffing. We also got a sub-award from the Inland Empire Community Foundation to be able to support the work of the nonprofit sector, and that's helped us in our census work. In consultation with our partners, initially we had floated an idea of saying maybe we should organize it by type of institution, right? So you have all of the school districts organized, you have all of the folks, all of the higher education partners organized. So organized by industry or sector. But pretty quickly, people said that that's one of the problems in our region, is we have all of these silos. And so if we can cut across and create a functional committee structure, that would be helpful. And it's been great. So for example, when it comes to media and marketing, we have people in media marketing that are the PIOs, the public information officers from the counties. We also have people in charge of marketing for media entities that are doing both paid and earned media work on Census. And we also have folks in media marketing from other corporations and from the nonprofit sector. So that's just one example of how we're organized functionally. And what that's enabled us to do is to build relationships across these sectors. It's also helped avoid this quote unquote usual suspects problem. So I've been in Riverside. I used to work at the Public Policy Institute of California after my PhD. Starting in 2005, I moved down to the Inland Empire. I've been in the Inland Empire for a while. And what I found over time is that whenever you have some kind of major planning process or some kind of effort to do things collectively, you'll have the usual suspects of a couple of dozen people who will time and again either volunteer or be consulted or be voluntold, right? In which they're given the subtle pressure to participate. What we have found in each of these committees, it's been great. We've seen people that are not at the kind of top leadership positions, but in those middle level leadership positions, stepping up, doing the work, showing up to these committees, first of all, upgrading their skills, but also building those cross-cutting relationships. So I feel pretty strong and confident that we are building the next generation of leaders that have this cross-sectoral experience. Finally, what you'll see at the bottom is a more traditional way that these committees could be organized. So we have different subregions in the Inland Empire, and I'll show you that in the next slide, as well as different hard-to-count communities that were a priority of census outreach. So we also have that as part of the structure, right? So we have the major regions in the Inland Empire. I'll show you a map later on where all these regions are, as well as tribal governments that are part of the Field Outreach Committee that are part of regions. And then we also have committees that are focusing on various hard-to-count populations, regardless of where they live in the Inland Empire. And then finally, what you'll see with those circles are city or other complete count committees. So for example, San Bernardino Community College District created their own effort. UC Riverside has an effort called UCR Counts. All of those committees coordinate up with these regional with this regional committee as well. In terms of how we measure success, I'll talk a little bit later about nonprofit capacity. But one major component of success has been our earned media coverage, not only locally, and I don't want to minimize that at all. Earned media coverage at the local level is so critical because it helps raise awareness, if not among the most hard to count populations, among the organizations that are serving them, but also elected officials and government agencies across our region. But we've also gotten coverage outside of our region, both nationally and statewide. In terms of the timeline, we've had this very well planned out process. We had a planning phase that still continues that involves data, mapping, community formation. We were very heavily involved in that. For education, NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, played a significant role with that. Public awareness, all of us have been trying in different ways, both through earned media coverage, social media outreach, and then paid media coverage on, with some of our partners to educate. I've been making the rounds to going to different Chamber of Commerce events, going to Council of Government meetings to spread the word. Motivation has also been an important part of this. So in terms of designing pledge cards, door-to-door, canvassing, trusted messengers, our nonprofit partners have been very heavily involved in that. And that work continues even with the shelter in place situation we find ourselves in now. And then finally, we're at the stage now, we're at the get out the count stage. Initially, we had it from March to June, but now we're going into August. And in fact, now it's going in potentially even later into September and parts of October to make sure that everybody is counted. I'll say a little bit in terms of where our census work fits in terms of the nonprofit sector in our region. We just released a couple of weeks ago the state of nonprofits in the Inland Empire. You can find that on our website. If you just go to socialinnovation.ucr.edu, under reports, you will see our state of nonprofits report. So I'll say a little bit about that in terms of where Census fits in to the nonprofit space in the Inland Empire. I'll also say very little bit about civic engagement. We had a report in, I think it was October or November of 2019 on the state of civic engagement in the Inland Empire, where we talk about Census, and so I'll touch upon that a little bit, and then I'll talk about what's next, especially in terms of COVID, but also in terms of our hopes for inclusive regional planning post-Census. Key findings in terms of our report is that there have been impressive proportional gains in the region in terms of funding, even though there's still some points where we lag. Nonprofits in our region, there have been a lot of new nonprofits since 2010. A lot of them are smaller than the statewide average. But the way that they've been able to overcome some of those limitations is to build strong coalitions in civic engagement, in immigrant rights, Census now, and then hopefully a lot of that will continue post-Census. Census has been a game changer in the region. That's been the theme of this entire talk. We're starting to see some movement in social enterprise, although with COVID, there are some cautionary tales in terms of organizations being reliant too much on social enterprise, especially in the particular way that COVID has hit our region and others economically that I want to talk about a little bit. And then finally, diversity and inclusion still remains a challenge in our region. We are just above 2/3 people of color. Latinos are a majority of the Inland Empire now, just over a majority. And yet when you look at the nonprofit sector, the leadership and the board membership does not reflect those demographic realities. And so that is an important priority moving forward. Some of the key findings that we have, and you can find these infographics on our website as well. The Inland Empire, among all regions in California, has the highest share of nonprofit startups, if you will, right? So if you add those first two bars, you have about 44% of our nonprofits have been founded since 2010. And a little over a quarter have been founded since 2015. And so that's the highest anywhere in California, significantly higher than in the Bay Area and then in the Central Valley in terms of the Sacramento Valley or the San Joaquin Valley. And the big implication there is, just as with other startups, you need a lot of upfront support in order to help these nonprofits not only survive their first few years, but to thrive and to grow. Fortunately, we have seen increase in philanthropy in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, although Riverside County started off at a higher level and remains at a higher level in terms of foundation giving compared to San Bernardino County. Still, if you look at nonprofit assets per capita, we analyzed the IRS Business Master File and combined that with Urban Institute data on nonprofit classifications. And what we find is that the Inland Empire is at about the same level as the San Joaquin Valley in terms of the size of the nonprofit. Sacramento Valley is actually doing relatively well, but a lot of that is because of these very large nonprofits in the city of Sacramento itself that have important business with the state of California. And so that's why you see, even though overall we see the Central Valley picture that is closer to the Inland Empire, the Sacramento Valley does look very different when you look at nonprofit assets per capita. And the Bay Area is just off the charts in terms of the size of those nonprofits. In terms of nonprofit giving, we see that the Inland Empire is much more reliant on outside philanthropy than philanthropy within the region. So that's one thing that was eye-opening, is that we actually, a lot of leaders in our region, and our center among them, have been advocating for a long time to say that funding from statewide philanthropy and national philanthropy needs to increase. And that still remains true. I'll show you a graph in a couple of slides. where we still are below the average for California, similar to the Central Valley in terms of outside funding coming into our regions. But we find that within our regions that there is a major gap. And so this report has been a real eye-opener in terms of holding up a mirror to our region to say that we need to step up in terms of our philanthropy. So in terms of foundation giving per capita, we are very low in our region. And if you look at foundation giving per capita coming from the outside, I don't have that slide, actually, I thought I did, but you can find that on our website. We are still about half of where the Central Valley is in terms of outside investments coming in, and that's significantly behind Orange County and LA County and the statewide average. Now, there are some bright spots here. We looked at earnings data, and what we found was that the nonprofit sector in the Inland Empire tends to pay better, in fact, much better than the rest of the private sector in the Inland Empire. Now, part of that is because of the overrepresentation of jobs in sectors like logistics and retail that tend to be lower wage on average than other sectors. But even when we look within each sector, so by the way, nonprofit jobs are overrepresented in health. So a lot of this, if you just look regardless of sector, it is the healthcare industry and that sector driving a lot of that advantage. But even when we break it down by sector, we find that for nearly every sector, nonprofit jobs tend to pay better than for-profit jobs. This is not true necessarily in other regions. So in Orange County, for-profit jobs pay better. In the Bay Area, for-profit jobs pay better. But in the Inland Empire, nonprofit jobs are good jobs. And they tend to offer higher wages. And then just based on our qualitative interviews, also tend to offer good benefits for their employees. So this is something that we've been using in our advocacy, especially in this COVID crisis moment, to get these counties, when they think about economic recovery and they think about good jobs, that they remember about the nonprofit sector. In San Bernardino County, the nonprofit sector accounts for 10% of the GDP in that county. Riverside County, it's smaller, it's 5% of the GDP in that county. But still, when you're talking about our smaller nonprofits that would qualify as small businesses under the CARES Act and the PPP program, for example, or some of these larger nonprofits, these medical centers and hospitals, they are all important when we think about economic resilience and recovery and whatever kind of reform we're going to have in the post-COVID moment in our region and statewide. In addition to analyzing IRS records and foundation records, we also conducted a survey of our nonprofits. We did a survey in February of, late February, early March of 2020. We also did a survey that was a COVID response survey a little bit later. So it's been interesting to see the kinds of responses we've gotten before COVID hit and the shelter in place and the kind of economic havoc that it's had, and then what's happening now. You know, even before, revenues were noted as a challenge, but they were not noted as high of a challenge as they are now. There were other challenges that nonprofits talked about, including well-established nonprofits in terms of getting their work recognized in, by news media, as well as getting their work recognized by public officials and government agencies. And that remains to be true even now. We also asked about staffing challenges, and you see the findings here in terms of recruiting staff and recruiting volunteers and retaining volunteers. We're going to be doing a wave 2 of the survey on this particular question, and our hunch is that staff recruitment is probably not going to be as much of an issue, but we imagine that recruiting, training, and retaining volunteers might be an issue. Diversifying staff was not identified as a significant issue among the nonprofit leaders that we surveyed, but this doesn't necessarily mean that there are no problems with diversity. In fact, when we asked them about diversity priorities in terms of executive leadership and board leadership, you see significant interest and concern among our nonprofits in terms of recruiting more board members of color, female leaders and female board members, as well as senior senior officials in these nonprofits that are leaders of color. We also did interviews, and there were some pretty consistent themes there that reinforce, and it's in line with the work that we've done in the region. That even though many of these nonprofits are smaller than the statewide average, strong collaborative work has really helped the region. Census has made individual nonprofits and nonprofits as a collectivity stronger. You are seeing these moves towards social enterprise, especially among youth-serving organizations that are securing more and more contracts with school districts to do their work. There's a lot of excitement for growth and the future of the Inland Empire. So all of these was done, in January, February, early March, before COVID hit, and I'll give the COVID update later. But one thing I want to point out is that what we find is in the nonprofit sector, either in terms of nonprofit density or in terms of assets per capita, there's some pretty significant regional disparities that you can find on in our report, in the print version of the report. We also have an Esri ArcGIS hub that allow people to dive deeper into our region to look at nonprofit density and nonprofit assets down at the census tract level. I'll just say briefly about how census work relates to civic engagement as well, and then close out my remarks soon. So my background, in my PhD is looking at voting and other forms of civic engagement. And what we did in our report was to use that opportunity to think systematically about where census fits in to what we call the continuum of civic engagement, right? So for a lot of people, when they think what happens next after census, they think about redistricting, and that absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Once you get the count of the populations and you get that data down at the census block level, you get out the maps, right? You go from get out the count to get out the maps. And there's gonna be a lot of activity in that in 2021. But it's not just about redistricting, right? Many of our partners were interspersing voter registration work with census outreach work in the fall and in the early part of winter of 2020. And some of them even pivoted to get out the vote work, right? They put away their census work for a while and did GOTV for the March primary, and then came back to doing census. So that's part of the continuum. So turnout matters as well, but we also need to think about engagement beyond voting. And so that's where this inclusive regional planning is coming into play. And then potentially also having people run for office. I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of people who got activated through census planning and outreach running for local office and maybe even higher office as a legacy effect of census outreach. And then of course, we will continue the cycle over the course in the next decade and see how we can keep building up our regional civic engagement capacity as we do so. In terms of the census effort, so in addition to the Inland Empire Complete Count Committee, the nonprofit effort is called Census IE. And it's been really amazing how our nonprofits, including some pretty small ones, have stepped up and innovated. So when it comes to the data systems that we're using, the civic engagement backbone organization called Inland Empowerment they have their own software and setup to do field outreach that they adapted to do census outreach. It could not be a strict translation because those are only registered voters that they had. So they created essentially a new way of structuring the data to look at parcels as opposed to registered voters and use that as the foundation for census outreach. We have been consuming that data, analyzing it, and pretty soon we'll have some publications that come out of that, but they've been a really strong partner in supporting, as a backbone organization, supporting the nonprofit effort. COVID has disrupted a fair amount of this work, but our center has adapted along with many of our census partners. So many of the census partners have pivoted in their census work. For us, what we've done is made sure that we are supportive of our community. in terms of the more immediate needs, even as we stay focused on census and think about what's next. So we created an effort called IE COVID Response. So that's a collaboration between our center and the Inland Empire Community Foundation. And it has a few key components. One is we have a COVID monitor. It's an ArcGIS hub. Our census work ended up being very important in terms of being able to put a lot of this visualization online, both in terms of cases as well as the vulnerability of our regions to COVID and the kind of economic disruptions, as well as the health disruptions. We also organized, earlier today, we had our 7th meeting, weekly meeting. So we have essentially a community briefing that has nonprofit leaders, program officers from philanthropy who are in our region or concerned about our region, the state liaison to the governor's office, as well as county representatives, all of them, plus a whole bunch of nonprofits. So we get on average about 65 to 75 people that have been consistently showing up week after week. And it's just been an incredible community that we've built. So we've come together in a lot of ways. And I would say, tried to be as strong as we can be as a region, with our center trying to play a helpful catalytic role there. We also quickly, because we'd just done a survey of nonprofits, we quickly moved to create an IE COVID response survey and partnered with the Inland Empire Community Foundation, as well as the Inland Empire Funders Alliance of various statewide foundations interested in our region. And we deployed it on March 18th. This was the day before the statewide shelter in place was put in. And we've collected data. We continue to collect data as of April 1st. We had 206 respondents. And you can see some of the key findings from that survey in our State of Nonprofits report. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through some of the types of organizations that we have, but many of them serve Latino populations, right? So super majority, 91% say medium or high in terms of having Latinos as an important part of their client base. But you see the other populations as well, including non-Hispanic, whites, African Americans, and the like. Asian Americans are underrepresented in this COVID response survey, but they're more generally underrepresented in the nonprofit sector. That's what we found in our census outreach as well. There's been a lot of instances of leadership, people stepping up, but also challenges. So for example, when I talked about social enterprise, Goodwill has been severely affected, right? Their major value add was through employment social enterprise, hiring people that are formerly incarcerated, housing insecure, homeless, formerly homeless. They had to shut all their operations, right? And they're slowly going to reemerge, but that's had a tremendous impact both on their revenue side as well as their staffing side, and in terms of their social innovation, right? Their social enterprise. Habitat for Humanity as well has been significantly impacted, more on their construction side. Their stores remained open, but they saw reduced revenues in their stores. And then finally, when it comes to our census partners, many of them actually started pivoting to phone banking by the second week of March. And then now it's entirely a combination of phone banking, text messaging. So a lot of these civic engagement partners have been used to canvassing through text messages. So they are now moved entirely to remote operations through phone, text messaging, and now increasingly through social media engagement, as well as small group Zoom sessions to try to motivate and energize census outreach efforts in our region. I will leave it at that in the interest of time, but finally what I want to say is that our hope all along was to say, instead of taking this really impressive effort, with all the social capital that's been built, the infrastructure, the connective tissue, and to just say, you know what, this was great. Let's fold our operations and come back in 9 years and do it again for Census 2030. There's a lot of interest among our census nonprofits to continue the work. There was a lot of interest among our government partners as well, and some of our philanthropic partners, but COVID has changed everything, right? We're hoping that it hasn't changed everything to the extent that we no longer have that vision of using those census coalitions across sectors to move towards this process of inclusive regional planning. So the main frame that we have there is to say, here are community organizations that have built up expertise. They are very sophisticated in terms of their data tools. They are they've also built up their substantive expertise at a very micro level in terms of understanding their communities. They've built these really strong partnerships with government agencies. This would be a perfect time to think in terms of the next 10 years, in terms of what kind of future we want to build in our region and how we can productively engage not only our census partners, but also all of those people that represent $2,000 a year, right, in terms of public financing, to really build an inclusive table and to not see the census as a one-off that happens every 10 years, or just as something that upgraded our infrastructure, but that can provide a roadmap for future work. So this effort is, right now it's named IE RISE, which is the Inland Empire Roadmap for an Inclusive and Sustainable Economy. The community partners are still running with it, and we're most likely going to be rolling it out publicly a month from now. And we're hopeful that this work can proceed over the summer and the fall to present a blueprint for the region with government partners, for-profit, research, and nonprofit partners, all at the same table with a comprehensive view in terms of what should the future of education look like, what should the future of transportation look like, what should the future of air quality look like, et cetera. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Hey, Karthik, before we take questions from the audience, I was just, thanks, number one, for a great panorama on what's going on down there with your center and in the Inland Empire. Could you take a step back and just explain some of the factors that actually make a community hard to count, and what is your understanding of the best evidence for interventions that actually work in preventing undercounts?
Yeah. I mean, so so some of the key kind of demographic factors include citizenship status, immigration status, right? So that was a very significant concern when the Trump administration had wanted to add that citizenship question. And that's why you saw such a severe pushback across the board throughout the country to drop that question, because that question has not been asked for decades. And research coming out of the Central Valley actually had shown that there would be a chilling effect for immigrants to participate. Many still fear that anxiety and uncertainty has been sowed in a lot of immigrant communities. So a big part of the messaging is to tell people that the citizenship question is not on the census, right? Because a lot of people had that anxiety. Another major aspect of the undercount is the 0 to 5 population. So in fact, what you'll see in terms of the coordinated messaging, I think starting today, if not tomorrow, is to get people to remember to count their newborns. Anyone who was born before April 1st, needs to be counted. And so in a lot of regions like ours and others, First 5 has been a very important partner to make sure that 0 to 5 population is counted. And then finally, another major source of the undercount is the youth population that are mobile. Well, generally populations that are mobile, housing insecure, homeless, youth. With homeless populations, the Census Bureau had a system put in place in terms of having these institutional counts in terms of these facilities. Some of that's been put on hold, but once you start seeing the relaxation of some of these rules, you will see counts of those institutions. Students, I mean, I'm sure this will be true at UC Davis and other places. In the last census, UC Riverside represented, the census tract that includes UC Riverside had the lowest initial response rate to the census, because there's a lot of uncertainty among students. And even you can't just take a roster of everyone living in the dorms and plug that into the census, because the census has additional questions, right, in terms of their racial identity, their gender, et cetera, that you cannot just use those administrative records. So those are some of the populations that frequently pop up, and those are some of the mitigation strategies. That said, we're behind nationally and in California and in these various regions of where we were 10 years ago. There was a paper form 10 years ago. Paper forms are now in the process of going out everywhere, and they'll probably be in all households, at least households with mailboxes, by the end of this week. But we are significantly behind where we were a decade ago in terms of the percentages of individuals and households that have been enumerated.